I am recording. Hello, high school Democrats, and welcome back to another interview. Today we are here with Mr. John Little, who is running for Scottsdale City Council. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It's great being here. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Of course. So I'll start with the first question. So one of your favorite sayings, I saw this on your website, is from former Mayor Drinkwater, who you were the chief of staff for back in the 90s, who said, potholes aren't Democrats or Republicans, they just need fixing. So what does bipartisanship mean to you in Scottsdale?
Well, let me just clarify for a second. So really what the question is what does nonpartisanship mean to me? Because we have people in different political parties. It's not just a bipartisanship, Republicans and Democrats. We have people in our community that belong to the Green Party, for example, or they're independents and Republicans and Democrats. And there are people like me who are registered as something called no party preference. And so we have, in the early 1950s, when the city became a city in 1951, the citizens voted to adopt a charter, which is our constitution, our city constitution, that said all elections will be nonpartisan. And so what they were really saying is that potholes aren't Democrats or Republicans, like clean water isn't a Republican or Democrat issue, or good emergency services or safe roads or good schools or anything else. And so they were saying that they believed in the 1950s, is sort of foreshadowing, that politics can get in the way of good service, especially at the local political level. So I am a 100% subscriber that in local politics at this level, what we try to do are just things that serve the public and to keep politics aside. So there really isn't an effort on my part to embrace bipartisanship. My interest is to embrace nonpartisanship at the local level. And it feels really good to me because, strangely enough, almost, I'd say about 50% of the questions I get from people are right away. They say, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And I say, I'm no party preference. And they say, no, you got to tell me, what's your label? And I say, well, I don't have a label. Well, how are we supposed to vote for you? And I said, read and talk and listen and explore the issues and then make up your mind. But this local politics shouldn't be a litmus test of whether you're a Democrat or Republican. It should be based on your character, your experience, your wisdom, your compassion, and things like that. So this fits really good for me, Daniel, and I appreciate that question.
I mean, that was just a fantastic answer too, because you're right, Scottsdale isn't having these huge partisan issues really in the government level, at least. And so there shouldn't be partisan politics involved. And, with Scottsdale kind of a pretty divisive place when it comes to politics in recent times, I really appreciate that you're a person that's not really taking either side. You're just saying, okay, let's all together solve the problems that shouldn't be political issues in the first place, which is amazing. And then also something I've noticed is, like you said, people will just jump and say, oh, you're Republican or you're Democrat, myself included. I did that at first. But then I realized kind of as I was doing more research when it comes to Scottsdale, I'm a first-time voter, that, it doesn't really matter what their party preference is. If they're Democrat or Republican, if they're like you, they're nonpartisan. It's about what they're going to do. And something I really noticed from your website is that you detail everything you're going to do, and that's reflected in your time as city manager and as chief of staff with Mayor Drinkwater, which is, you have like the best looking website of all the candidates, to be honest. And I mean, you're just such a transparent and great person, and I don't care about the party to vote for you. So yeah.
Well, thank you. That's it's a point of personal pride right now. And let me tell you, though, it's difficult because people want to put labels on us. They want to put labels on each one of you. They want a convenient label because it's sort of like intellectual shorthand, that if they can give you a label, they believe they know everything about you. And I think that not having labels on us encourages people to go deeper and find out who we really are inside, each one of us.
Definitely. All right, with that, I'll give our next question over to Nicole. Thank you.
Hi, nice to be talking with you today.
Hi,
So, my
Nicole.
question is about COVID-19. So, it's hurt a lot of communities all across Arizona, and in Scottsdale, specifically our tourism industry. What are you going to do to help Scottsdale recover and grow strong again?
Boy, that's the $64,000 question right now, but we do know that our economic recovery and the future of our community is largely dependent on our ability to control the spread of this disease. And so, I think that the city of Scottsdale and all of us, each of us has to starts with individual responsibility. We need to wear masks and we need to, that's not only to protect ourselves, but to protect other people that we're around. We need to follow the CDC guidelines. I was just on the phone before I was talking to you guys that one of the research departments at ASU is rolling out a test. You may be the first people to actually hear this right now. They're rolling out a saliva test for COVID testing that it's possible to have the results back quicker than any other test that's out there right now, really quick test. That coupled with contact tracing should allow us to, for the first time, really get a handle on the disease. And so where this is going to be rolled out is in collaboration between ASU and the Scottsdale Unified School District, where the school district, because we don't want our kids to be the canaries in the coal mines, we need an aggressive and accurate COVID testing mechanism, and that perhaps means the saliva test, and it also means effective contact tracing. So when we put our kids first as our number one priority in our community, and we can ensure their safety and we can get kids back to school, then parents can go back to work and we can feel safer with what we're all trying to do. So that's what I think we need to be doing. We need to be taking individual responsibility to do what's right, to be models for everybody else, and to be fearless and courageous models, and not be intimidated if people don't want us to wear masks. We're going to wear them anyway, and that's what we need to do. So that's sort of my approach to supporting especially new technology, new medical technology as it relates to testing is going to be very valuable. And perhaps towards the end of the year, we'll have a single vaccine, or maybe even 2 or 3 vaccines that can be found to be efficacious. And so we'll keep our eye on that too. But everything's going to follow our ability to manage the disease.
Right. And so I'd just like to follow up a little bit with a big part of Scottsdale economy is their tourism.
Yeah.
What exactly are we going to do to fix specifically tourism in the economy with COVID, obviously?
Right. Well, I think I kind of hope I'm like everybody else, and that is when right now I don't feel safe to travel. I don't want to get on an airplane. I just don't feel like, for me, that I'm ready to do that. And so, like just a couple weeks ago, my wife and I decided we were going to take a staycation. And as we sat down to plan out where we wanted to go locally, the first thing that came up in our conversation was, where will we feel safe? Where will we feel secure? Where are best practices employed? And so we started calling around to different resorts, and some did sort of the basic things. They said, oh, okay, when a guest leaves a room, we do this, and in a restaurant, we do that. And we found out that there's a pretty big variation between best practices and what people are doing to help keep us safe and secure. So to answer your question, I think one of the things that Scottsdale can do is to put a stake in the ground and say, our goal should be the healthiest community in America. We should capitalize on our history, where people used to come here literally 100 years ago, you guys, to treat tuberculosis. They came to the desert Southwest. So we've had this long history of associating Scottsdale and our open spaces as healthy living. I'm saying let's capitalize on that now. Let's be top of mind when people say, where do you want to travel? And whoever they're with says, you know, I think let's go to Scottsdale. I hear they have melanoma screening. They have the Mayo Clinic there. They have the lowest rate of obesity. They have the lowest rate of diabetes and heart disease. And they are doing all these wonderful things to be a healthy and safe community. They are physically fit. They have great trails and bike paths. And you know what? Scottsdale to me sounds like a great place to go because we're going to be safe. We're going to be secure. We can practice healthy lifestyles. They have more health food restaurants and grocery stores per capita than any other place in the country. They practice environmental sustainability. And those are the things that we are interested in. And so I want the people in this country to think that's what Scottsdale is. That's our brand. And I think that that's a number one thing in how we're going to recover our tourism economy.
Yes, absolutely. I think the first thing people think about, like you said, is how safe the place. They know, hey, Scottsdale is doing everything they can to make sure that their hotels are safe and everything is sanitized, and you have to go and you have to wear a mask. And they have fun activities to do that are outdoors. That way we can still get out and exercise and be safe at the same time. So yeah, I think that was a great answer. You did all, like that was just a great answer. Thank you so much. And with that, I'll just give the next question to Lauren.
Yeah, so it's so nice to be speaking with you today. And I actually just have a quick question about your answer that you just said to Nicole. Like when you're talking about this testing at ASU, you said that it's going to be much faster than the rest of the tests that are happening in Arizona right now. Like, do you have a timeline of how quickly like people will be getting the results or no?
I don't. I know that right now, a lot of the testing, people don't get their results back for 2 weeks. And I'm told that it may be that this new saliva test, and I've heard a range, so I'll give you a range, but within like a period of 4 hours to 3 days would be sort of the range that the saliva test should be able to get results back to people.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot better than 2 weeks. So thank you for that. And now I'll go into my other question. So the hot debate this year in Scottsdale elections is development. There are advocates to develop our city with new opportunities or to stay as we are now. What is your stance on development and why?
That's a really good question. It's a hard question because a lot of people look at growth and development as sort of a binary choice of, are we going to grow or are we going to try to preserve what we have? And I think what I've tried to do throughout my whole career at the city is to say, you know, we are so fortunate to live in a place that's 33 miles long and 11 miles wide. We have literally one of the biggest downtown areas in the country. Our downtown area in Scottsdale is the same footprint as downtown San Francisco. And so we have space to do things, and we have different character areas in the city. Some of our character areas say that we should be rural in nature. No curbs and no sidewalks and equestrian trails and no outdoor lighting to speak of, and dark skies. And so if you were to ask me in that particular character area whether we should grow or try to remain the same, I would say let's try to remain the same. Let's try to preserve that character of that area. Then we have areas that are more urban and more contemporary, and they allow for more contemporary architecture and 24/7 lifestyle, and they're supposed to be vibrant, and they're supposed to have an energy to them. And in those areas, I would say, we need to grow. We need to bring more people. Like in our downtown, we really should have about 5,000 more people living downtown. Because if you really want to have a downtown where people can live, in some of our other great cities, we see grocery stores and services like that. And we don't even have a grocery store in our downtown. And so it's not sustainable. So we have people living downtown in all these condos and apartments, and there's no grocery store. So what do they have to do? They have to drive somewhere, and that puts congestion on the streets. So what we want is a downtown that's growing, that's bringing people in, that's creating some density, that's creating some vibrancy, that takes pressure off the streets from a traffic standpoint by compressing a development into an area that is built for that. So as it relates to your question of how do I feel about development, I think I'm 100% for development and growth in areas where it's been planned for. And I would like to see some of the areas like even in our old town where the Rusty Spur Saloon is at Brown and Main, where there's a single story architecture and there's Cavalier's Blacksmith Shop and there's just Porter's, all these wonderful places that I believe really shouldn't change, and we should do everything we can to preserve them. So I'm both for preservation and progress in their appropriate place, in their appropriate geography, according to the different character areas of our downtown, of our entire city.
Yeah, that's a really great answer, and I appreciate how you didn't just take one stand or the other, how you focused on different parts of the city and saying how they're different solutions or like your stance on depending on like, what the nature of that part of town is, just because Scottsdale does have so many different parts, like when there's northern Scottsdale where it's like not as many stores, like where you're saying where like in like Old Town there's going to be a lot more stores and a lot more happening with the restaurants and bars and all of that, and just focusing on the development based off of that. That's really great. Really great. So thank you so much for that.
Well, and I appreciate your question. And one of the things that you guys can get involved in is that over the course of the next year, we're going to be doing an update of the downtown, or excuse me, of the city's general plan, which hasn't been updated for 19 years. And that's a really long time to have a plan in place. And so much has changed in our community in the past 19 years. It's time to start looking ahead. It's way past time to start looking ahead to say, how are those character areas working and how can we preserve the areas that we need to preserve, and how can we continue to grow and develop those areas that need to grow and develop. There's an old adage in urban planning that says there are a lot of cities that have gone bankrupt because they haven't grown. There are no cities that have gone bankrupt because they've grown too much. So Herb Drinkwater used to say, people are going to come here, get used to it. We, with our beautiful mountains and our fiery sunsets and our open spaces and just the beautiful architecture and the landscape that we have here, people are coming here. We're not going to stop it. So the only question is how will we accommodate them, and how will we accommodate that growth in a sensitive way? I would add one thing to that, which is I think Scottsdale deserves world-class architecture. I love communities that architecturally they make a statement that it's part of the art. It's part of the art of a community to see new and different kinds of architecture. So I'd like us to be even more bold in some areas where it's consistent with the character to introduce even a more interesting architecture than we have today.
Yes, definitely. And thank you again so much for that answer. It's really, really educational, and just like I learned a lot about Scottsdale and development and everything from your answer. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Danny for our last big policy question.
All right.
I've also never really, I mean, there's some candidates who like touch on it a bit, but I've never heard like a candidate like give that answer really. You're so unique in that way where, like, for example, I'm all for development, but I don't want development in a place like our preserve, for example. Like, I love it, big open spaces. That's what makes Scottsdale so unique. And so I really appreciate that you gave that answer, because it's like exactly what I believe too. So our last major policy question is, education is a big thing on your campaign trail, you've said. You touched on this a bit with COVID earlier, and obviously as students, our public education is important to us too. So post-COVID, how are you going to help our public schools?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways to help our public schools. First of all, there's a lot of candidates that say, what are you talking about, John? Schools aren't related to this. They're different political subdivisions. The school districts, Scottsdale Unified School District and Cave Creek District and Balls District, Paradise Valley District, they're all individual political subdivisions, and they have their own governing boards. They can pass their own bond elections and raise taxes and financing to fund schools. And the city, of course, is a different kind of political subdivision, and we have our own city council that can do the same thing for cities. And people say, John, why aren't you running for the school district? Because you're so interested in schools, but they're two separate things. So, what don't you understand? And I say, well, here's what I don't understand is I don't understand why education isn't a more important part of the city's general plan that I just talked about. In our city's general plan, that is an aspirational plan that describes the community we all want to live in, that I am going to live in, that you're going to live in, that your families will live in, that additional generations are going to live in. Why is it that we have in each general plan, in our general plan, we have 15 elements. There's a transportation element. There's an economic development element. There's a housing element. There's a mobility element. And all these different elements describe the future that we want for our community in those areas. But there's no education element. It doesn't describe what the role of schools are in our community. And so I think that that's a big missing thing. It's a big missing topic of discussion because everybody knows that there's a nexus between successful cities and successful schools. You can't have a successful school system in a city that doesn't perform well and is not functioning. And you can't have a successful city and at the same time have bad schools. There's a direct relationship between those two things. And so when some things like schools and cities are so inexorably entwined, they should be part of the same plan. We should have joint planning. We should talk about how we're going to fund our schools and fund our city. We should talk, how can we talk about transportation in the city without considering school transportation? We bus tens of thousands of kids to school every day, and parents driving, and students are driving, and it's all part of who we are. It should be part of the same plan. It doesn't mean that our plan in the city should override the school district's plan. All I'm saying is that there should be conversations between the city and the school districts to do joint planning for the benefit of all of us. And so I believe very strongly that the trajectory of our city and the trajectory of our schools and the success of our students is a joint responsibility of all of us and doesn't belong just to the schools or the city. So I have proposed that the city put into their general plan an education element. And I believe that that would be there's only one other city in the entire country that's done that. It's Plano, Texas. And it's really a really neat plan. And so I'm not asking our city to reinvent the wheel. It's been done somewhere else. But I am interested in saying, you know what? Maybe that's a best practice that we could adopt here. We don't have to invent everything here for the first time. We should be able to borrow from each other when somebody else has a good idea.
I mean, just thank you. That was such an incredible answer. And to us students, I know, we've always kind of felt like the district is on its own. I mean, I'm a Scottsdale Unified School District, but yeah, the district, when it doesn't get a bond passed, there's nothing else they can really do about it. But even just advocating to have those talks between the city and the school, since, we are the Scottsdale Unified School District in the city of Scottsdale, is really, really important to us. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And if you have just another second related to that, one of the things that I did when I worked at the city, I think this was probably in 2007, we had just, there'd been a period of time when building virtually stopped in the city. It was actually the recession back then. and building stopped in the city. And so when building stopped, we didn't have any need for building inspectors. So they all got laid off and they went and did other things. And then the economy came back and people started to build. And guess what? We didn't have any building inspectors. So we went over to Scottsdale Community College and said, hey, how about this? If you create a curriculum that can teach building inspectors the skills that they're going to need and give them the education and test them and give them a certificate in building inspection, we'll promise them a job. As soon as they get out of school, we'll give them a job. So we'll create a pipeline. And that's one of those areas where the city can say, here's the jobs that are needed for the future. How can we work with schools to prepare people so that there's ready employment when people are done with their schooling? And I think those are important conversations to have so that we want our kids, especially our young people that go through our school system, to also be able to come and work in the city and live in the city. And so affordable housing is going to be a big issue too, which is it's directly related to education. One of the things I'm in the Scottsdale Charros that we're doing is we will take any student in Scottsdale Unified School District who wants to go get a teaching degree at ASU. We'll give them a scholarship to go do that and pay their way to get their teaching certificate, as long as they promise that they'll come back into Scottsdale School District and teach school. And so what we need to do is create more of a life cycle experience where, I know that I want my own kids who are a little bit older than you, but I want them to be able to live here and afford to live here. I want them to be able to find jobs here. And that's what really makes a community, you guys, is when we can have multi-generations where you're a senior citizen, you're on a fixed income, you shouldn't have to leave Scottsdale and move to Apache Junction because you can't afford to live alone anymore. And we can't have a community where young people and young families can't afford to live here. So we truly need to find a way to create more of a multi-generational culture in our community so that we can live together as families. So anyway, I just thought I'd tell you that at the end.
Thank you, yes. All right, so we're kind of filled up on time, but I'm going to give a very quick last question to Nicole, a fun question.
All right.
Okay. What is something outside of politics that your voters might not know about you? And this could be like a hobby or a TV show you really like to watch. I don't know, just anything.
Every summer, my wife and I go up to Iowa and we ride in a bike ride called RAGBRAI. And we dip our rear tire in the Missouri River, and we ride 571 miles across Iowa and dip our front tire in the Mississippi River. And we do that every year. It lasts about 7 days, and we ride about 81 miles a day. And I don't know that a lot of people know that I do that, but I like cycling a lot, and to be out, believe it or not, in the middle of the cornfields is sort of a Zen experience for me. So it's a pretty cool thing.
Wow, yeah, that is really cool. I've never known that. That's so hard. I couldn't do that.
Yes, you could.
Well, I guess with that, I'll let Danny just finish up the interview. So thank you.
All right,
Thank you,
Scottsdale
Lauren.
voters, city council elections are very, very important. The up and down the ballot races are all very important in these elections, as we've seen from a lot of these interviews. And John Little is our pick for city council, and we're so proud to endorse him. And he's such a great candidate. I mean, I already voted for him, and if you haven't voted yet, make sure that you do. Thank you so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you for your time, and really the best questions I've been asked the whole campaign so far. So well done.